Hello, everyone. So let's get started. It is a pleasure to welcome you today to our webinar, Digitization of Financial Institutions, Due Diligence Guidelines for Investors. Please note that this webinar will be recorded, and we kindly ask that you mute your microphone when not speaking and use the chat box for any questions or comments throughout the presentation. So first, let me introduce our speakers. Mark Fleming is a consultant with IFC, CGAP, and other distinguished organizations. He is also the president of Frontier Ventures, where he provides advisory services to financial service providers and regulatory authorities. Mark has extensive experience guiding financial institutions and funders through digital transformation processes and helping them create more value with digitization. For the past 3 years, Mark has served as the technical lead for the CGAP MFI digitization project. Welcome, Mark. Caroline Vance is a project finance specialist at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC. Prior to joining DFC, Caroline was the Capital Innovation and Engagement Director at RevFed and held senior positions at Deutsche Bank, where she was responsible for originating and managing portfolios of impact investments. She was also part of the team that tested the guidance we will be discussing today. My name is Isabel Barris. Like Mark, I have been working on the CGAP MFI digitization project since 2021, focusing on testing various strategies to scale the approach and reach more financial institutions. And I will be your moderator today. Let's go to the agenda. Can we just go to the agenda? Yeah, thank you. During this webinar, Mark will start by providing guidance for investors interested in supporting the digitization of financial institutions, drawing from CGAP's research on the digitization of microfinance institutions. After giving us an overview of the guidance, he will then illustrate how a funder can apply the approach by presenting a case study of a financial institution seeking funding to automate its loan renewal decision-making process. Following Mark's presentation, Caroline will share reflections from DFC on the application of this guidance at 2 institutions in India. And finally, we will reserve time for questions at the end of the session. So if you have any questions or comments during the presentation, we ask that you please post them in the chat. So let me start by giving you some background on the CGAP MFI digitization project. The project led to the creation of the guidance that we'll be discussing today. So we wanted to start with a little bit of background. The project began 3 years ago when CGAP set out to explore how and where value is created in the microfinance sector through digital transformation. CGAP wanted to understand why, despite significant investments, so few digitization initiatives had successfully transformed the traditional MFI model. And to explore this question, CGAP conducted extensive research examining over 120 financial institutions across various legal structures, including banks, microfinance institutions, and non-bank financial institutions. The aim was to identify the common elements of success, as well as the main challenges that were holding these initiatives back. CGAP highlighted 5 MFIs that had successfully created measurable customer and business value through digitization. And these case studies started to reveal a set of principles that drive success. From 2022 to 2023, these principles were tested with nearly 30 institutions, focusing particularly on 2 key areas: automating loan renewals and developing a business intelligence practice, both of which are key to unlocking the value of digitization. You'll see a summary of these principles on the right side of the slide. Throughout the project, CGAP actively involved funders, recognizing their crucial role in driving success. And last year, CGAP published insights to help funders more effectively support digitization efforts. The digitization guidance we'll be discussing today builds on this work, showing how the lessons from the project can inform the due diligence process for investors, helping them make more informed decisions. So with that, I will hand it over to Mark, who has a lot to cover, and he will walk us through the guidelines developed in collaboration with the DFC team.
All right, thank you. Good day, everyone. This webinar is going to focus very much on guidance and approach for assessing a proposal to launch a new product or channel that uses digital technology. And maybe the first thing to say is that it's a very specialized piece of an assessment toolkit. It doesn't replace the broader due diligence practices that most of us know, but I think it's helpful to think of this as the missing piece. As Isabel said, this comes out of our work, first of all, researching many institutions that had invested in technology. Comes out of our attempt to find the best cases of value creation. And in that exercise, the overwhelming takeaway that we had was really not the successes, it was the extremely high incidence of failure. The high incidence of companies investing millions of dollars in digital products and channels and not generating value. And this was also the self-assessment of many of the institutions that we interviewed. And so this piece now really comes out of that, because out of seeing the failure, we started to focus very, very much on, well, what are the characteristics of the institutions that succeed, and how does that differ from the ones that are failing? And those 5 principles that Isabel mentioned are the takeaways from what it takes to succeed. So this exercise we're going to go through today is basically, how do you find out if a company is using those 5 principles? Okay, let's jump into it. Next slide. I think we missed one. Should be, why do we focus on product development? Next slide. Okay. Talk a bit about why do we focus on the product development plan? Why is there so much here? And I'm going to use a simple analogy, but it's sort of as if a company told you, we're going to build a rocket and we're going to fly it to the moon. You're now going to shift your attention to the question of, show me your plans for the rocket and show me the laboratory you're going to make it in. The guiding principle behind this is that what we found is that it is very difficult to go to an institution and do a general due diligence on just, for example, asking them to explain how they develop products, or asking them about their business intelligence practice. Their capabilities are actually demonstrated in the very specific plan they have for developing the product. That's a key point here. And so this due diligence guidelines focus very much on the product development initiative and the practice that creates it. Helpful to point out that these 5 principles translate readily into an agile product development practice. Anyone familiar with agile will immediately recognize the words, the language, the artifacts, the processes here, because it is essentially an agile product development practice. And what we're going to offer you here is really a high-level checklist. It is a high-level checklist for someone who knows enough about agile product development to be able to recognize it when they see it, and capable of bringing in the experts on the highly technical pieces. All right, go to the previous slide. Yeah. We found this to be effective for both established financial institutions. I say two of the main use cases that we found would be banks or microfinance institutions, financial institutions that want to build a new product or channel. So this could be, we want to build a agent network. We want to build an automated loan decisioning model, and launch a new product. Increasingly now it's fintechs who are providing those services, platform as service and software as service models. So it works for both financial institutions and the fintechs that support them. We'll also say that this tool is really derived from a tool that management and a board would use in a company that has an established agile practice. So that is to say that if head of business comes to the CEO and eventually to the board and says, I want to invest $4 million in launching this new product, what we're going to show you today is the thing that head of business would be showing to the CEO. And ultimately, if it's big enough, the CEO would show to the board. And that's why this assessment is expecting to find these things happening in the institution. Next slide. So what does this mean for due diligence? I'm sorry, there should be a slide. There's a slide before this. No?
This is what I have, but if this seems like the wrong version, we could take a short break.
I can work with it, but this is the second slide that's been missing. So
No,
we'll see how it goes. I'm going to run quickly through at a high level. These are the things that we're looking for when we're doing this assessment. And we've organized it into 3 high-level questions. The first question is there a well-defined strategy for creating value? When we talk about this, this breaks down into some more specific questions, but this already starts the foundation for seeing the level of clarity and precision which the company is bringing to it. Second has to do with business intelligence. Is the business intelligence practice good enough to generate insights on customer behavior? And the third is the company prepared to deliver the product? And we'll walk through the very specific instruments that we would expect to find on it. This product roadmap, how exactly they're going to implement the technology solution, what are their metrics for measuring success, and what does their product team look like and how is it resourced? Okay, let's see what we have here on the next slide. Okay, so in the spirit of this, I'm going to go back over these elements of the due diligence process, but we're going to talk about them conceptually. What is this thing? What am I looking for? But then I'm going to show you an example from the real world of a company's plan. And this is, again, is very important because it goes to our main point that what you need to see is the company has this thing, and you're actually looking at the plans for the rocket and you're looking at their laboratory. So what we're going to do is walk through and switch back and forth between these different 3 phases of the assessment and show you examples that highlight what we think are some of the best practices for how companies do it. All right, next slide. So this question, is there a well-defined strategy for creating value? Number 1 question is, what is the customer and business value that you aspire to create with this product? And this we start with this because this is where many of the problems start. it is very, very common. It is increasingly common. In the past 10 or 15 years, certainly in the microfinance industry, it would be very, very difficult to find a microfinance institution or a bank for that matter that was not investing significant amounts of money in digital products and services. Everyone, and I think still, is convinced that to stay competitive in the future, you have to have digital capabilities. But sometimes, and very often, this just translates into, well, we're going to invest, $3 million in this new gadget, without being very clear about exactly how's that gadget going to create business value and how is it going to create customer value, because it won't create business value if it doesn't create customer value. And the second piece of that, often that is missing, is what is the hypothesis about the product features that generate the value. And this, it's important to pay attention to the nuances here, because it's one thing for a company to say, let me take an example, say from East Africa. The rise of nano loans in East Africa, basically, automated decisioning models that generate small loans, became a very successful product for a lot of banks. And there were many institutions that just say, oh, we're going to build a nano loan. And it is not enough to say we're going to build a nano loan. You have to be very, very specific about the features of that loan, how the customers are going to get it, every aspect of the loan. It is the question of whether or not the company is tying their aspiration to build value to the very specific product features that will generate the value. And then what is the evidence that they have for the hypothesis, and what is the business case? So I'm going to walk through this on an example. So let's jump in the next slide. So in this particular company, the example that we're going to use is a microfinance institution, and they aspired to create an automated decisioning model. So basically, customers would apply for a loan and it would be approved immediately based on an algorithmic decisioning model. And going into it, the company did have some very specific objectives. They wanted the product to be affordable, and this meant that this product was going to have to very, very significantly bring down their operating costs, because they had a target for how much they were going to charge the clients, and that it would be a viable product to make small loans. Flexible is a bit more abstract, as is impactful. But their objectives around it being scalable, about how big of a portfolio that it could create, and then in this particular case, replicable. This particular company wanted to be able to replicate this same model across its subsidiaries. And so the whole question of how the technology platform and how the product functioned, they said it needs to be deployable in any financial institution. And we want to own the intellectual property and the infrastructure that enables it. So this institution was planning on selling this thing in the market after they perfected it. And finally, they were very clear about saying, look, in this product development initiative, we want measurable results in 12 months. We don't want to invest $5 million in this and find out at the end that it's not delivering. We want enough validation of early stage indicators in 12 months. So this is, although this is still at a high level, you see the elements here that are going to drive many of the next elements that we're going to look at. It's next slide. And so this product hypothesis, I would say that early in the assessment, this is one of the main things to focus on, because again, it shows whether the company is drawing a clear link between the value it wants to create and the product features that is going to create that value. And so in this case, this list, this is the following product features will drive the performance. You know, a loyalty program features, operational streamlining, incentive-based pricing, graduating clients from group to individual loans. You know, these are very specific things. And so, you know, we're not just talking about automating loan renewal, we are talking about very, very specific features. And the reason that this is so important is the entire implementation plan is going to be based on these things. And if they have not defined these things, they cannot have a structured implementation plan that has the elements in it that you need. In very much related to this, then, are the metrics for defining success. So already here, right at the very beginning, and this would be maybe in the first 10 minutes of a company explaining to you what they're going to do, you know, they've said, this is our concept of product features that are going to drive value, and this is how we're going to measure that value. And in their case, you see 3 indicators, 2 of which are very clearly related to business value. You know, the portfolio staff ratio, basically an increase in OpEx efficiency, and that portfolio and arrears would remain stable. The loan renewal rate is also very much drives business value, but it is also the one indicator in here that goes to the customer value. The customer value issue, because it is very difficult to measure customer value, and the most useful way of doing it is deciding on a proxy. And this is basically a demand proxy, saying that our customers right now are not renewing their loans very often. If we create this product and customers like it, we are going to use an increase in their loan renewal rate as a proxy for saying that they're satisfied and it's generating value. And then there will be other follow-up qualitative ways of talking with the customers and finding out why they like it. But that first proxy is very important. So at this high level, you know, this already sets the company up for having the detailed plans that we'll discuss next. I just want to repeat that the key element here is, has the company identified the product features, the features that are going to drive the value. Next slide, please. Very careful also about, is there evidence support the hypothesis? I'm not going to go into these. They had their own evidence for it. They definitely believed the success of nano loans in Africa really showed that customers really wanted convenience, that the speed of being able to renew their loans automatically. They knew very clearly that credit was their core business, and so improvements in there would, you know, they definitely had these very specific, I'm going to call it evidence or foundation of their hypothesis for it. And once again, this is critical because it tells you this very much drives the indicators for success, saying, do you know what success looks like? Next slide. So the business case, this is also very often missing, and I'll just share an experience from when we test drove this methodology with 5 institutions. As most of you probably know, a lot of microfinance, a lot of financial institutions are wanting to automate loan decisioning, especially loan renewals, and the belief that it would generate value was so strong in these institutions that we worked with that they didn't bother to build a business model. They just absolutely believed that this was going to be good for everyone. And that in itself is probably reasonable. A lot of investments get approved because of everybody's just convinced that it's blatantly obvious that it's going to create value. But what matters here is how it's going to develop. And so in our experience, what we found was that the companies were so convinced they just thought, as long as customers pay us back, this is going to make us money and customers are going to be happy. And so we built this model with the institutions, but they spent an entire year building the model, launching the pilot, doing proof of concept around a single thing, and that was making sure that customers paid them back. They didn't want the par rate to increase. Well, if you understood how the model was created, it was obvious that the customers were going to pay you back because they tested the model out on their premier clients. And you could have gone to head of business or risk and just say, well, what's your historic par rate? And their good clients always pay them back. That's why they're good clients. They're good clients because they pay them back. It's circular logic. So they just lent money to their best clients, and of course they paid them back. It didn't prove anything about the model, and they spent 12 months doing it. And if they had, in this case, the company had run the business model and seen that very clearly this thing is going to work if it increases commercial officer productivity. It's got to increase the number of loans that our credit officers are dispersing in a month and that they are managing. So in this very high level business model, you can see that they're saying that there are our commercial officers are going to disperse 35 loans instead of 15 loans, and the resultant portfolio is going to be 3 times as big, and our staff and our expense to income ratio is going to drop almost by a third. And that drives the question of the success here is going to be measured on these indicators. What does commercial officer productivity look like? What is the portfolio? What is the income to revenue ratio? Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about business intelligence. Already in the discussion, you would have expected the company to have been presenting historical data on their own portfolios to show the customer behavior that they want to change with the new product. In this case that we're looking at, the company wanted to improve the loan renewal rate, and they wanted to drive more new loans. So and I'll show you in a minute how they arrived at that. But the bigger question is whether the product team is actually resourced and tasked with business intelligence. And this, I would say, of all of the capabilities that we have seen, that I would say of the 125 institutions we've looked at, only one of them had a level of business intelligence that really came close to what they would need. This kind of capabilities is found commonly in startup tech companies, but not readily in financial institutions. And so there is a series of questions to ask. Are your product teams responsible for it? What are the insights that you have about your existing customer behavior? What metrics are you using? And then there are more technical discussions about the data warehouse and what data they put it in, and whether that thing is on its own server, and what kind of analytical tools that they use. These are all sort of technical questions that you need to ask and be able to understand what their response. And I'll show you now what it looks like. I'm sorry, next slide. So again, the company had this very clear proposal. We want to automate our loan renewals, and they had this dashboard, and this dashboard is basically showing the loan renewal rate, and the loan renewal rate is how many of our customers renew their loans, basically. And you see the blue line of traditional clients, the loan renewal rate is quite poor and declining. And this particular company showed in one of its subsidiaries where they had implemented this particular initiative before that, there was a very significant increase in the loan renewal rate from a very, very similar kind of product initiative. And so this kind of analytics, it's generated by basically downloading information out of the core banking system and and studying patterns in customer behavior. So in this case, it has to do with loan renewals, but you could just as easily be using customer behavior, transactional behavior, deposit behavior, and you can drill into it with high degrees of segmentation. But the key point here is that the company, as it's presenting its plan and saying, we're going to build value in this way, at the same time, they're showing you, this is how it's been historically. Essentially, this is the problem that we are trying to solve. And this is the opportunity that we see to create more value, because this already gives you your metrics for measuring success going forward. Next slide, please. Again, now we're looking right at the charter of the company that we're looking at as a test case, and they were very, very clear about the business intelligence practice. They had a broader business intelligence practice, and so in the product charter that they used to approve this product, this was very clearly laid out. It was clear that the product team would have a data analyst embedded in it, that the team would be responsible for generating business intelligence, that this will consist of a series of libraries, a library of dashboards that track customer behavior, and that the IT gave the mandate to the IT department to populate a data warehouse, extracting data from the core banking system. So right from the very beginning in the product charter, very clear instructions to both the team and the rest of the company. You need to have this basis for business intelligence, and it needs to be this clear. Next slide. So let's talk about ready to deliver. Up to this point, we're really talking about the sort of high level, how is the company presenting, its objectives and its metrics for success. But now we're going to look at the rocket workshop. What do they have the ability to deliver? We're going to look at the product roadmap and the underlying sprint plans for the testing of product features. We're going to ask, are there clear definitions of success and ways to measure it? We're going to look at the tech rollout and essentially the product team. As I said before, early on, when the company says, we're going to build this thing, and it's going to have these features, and these are the features that are going to drive value. Okay, that was number one. How clear is that? Number two goes to the product roadmap. Let's go to the next slide and look at that. In a product roadmap, again, in an agile practice, you'll see sprint schedules, and these sprint schedules will have very, very specific objectives. In this sprint, we're going to test risk-based pricing. In this sprint, we're going to test our loyalty program features. And again, this is the question of, once a company has made a hypothesis about the features of a product that are going to generate value, you need to see the plan. Okay, is your plan set up so that you have allocated time and resources to test and develop those features? And that is very, very important, because it's the part that's almost always underestimated, is like not, and if I go back to our example of the companies that we work with, from the very beginning, they didn't define the business model and did not very specifically focus on commercial officer productivity or loan renewal rates, and therefore they never tested them. They only tested arrears response. So if you don't define a thing, and then it doesn't end up early in the sprint cycles and in the implementation plan. This is a very high level product roadmap, and the product roadmaps typically are high level. But this product roadmap is already giving you, and a product roadmap is one of the anchor artifacts in a product development process, and you should probably see it on the wall of the product team. Here you're looking for whether or not they have defined the sprints, again, as very specific development periods for the key product features. This roadmap does another thing in it, and it tracks the technology. And the most, probably the single most contributor to failure in a lot of technology initiatives is the tech deficit, that the company takes on an implementation of the technology that's simply too much, and it goes over budget and it goes over time and it swamps the project. So one thing that is very critical to watch is whether or not the company has selected a minimum viable product, and that means they have stripped the technology down to its absolute leanest so that they can test the product. And really, in all of this capacity to implement, what we're looking for is, have you set up the product development cycle so that you can test? You can test and develop as you go. And the biggest obstacle to that is the technology. And so in this particular case, for example, they started developing the product with a decisioning model that was not integrated in any way to their system. It only generated pre-approved. So they basically took their data on a daily basis, ran it through the model, had the model kick out the customers who were eligible, and then they sent invitations out to those customers. Now that's steps away from eventually a customer being able to auto initiate that on their own, but it was a very simple way of doing it. It didn't require any system integration, didn't require any front end development by the customer, and it allowed the product team to focus very, very specifically on building the product features and putting them in front of the customer. So this, what you're looking for in a product roadmap is exactly that. Do they have a plan for testing the core features? And is their tech, do they have a good plan for a minimum viable tech solution? In the next slide, you can see what the sprint schedules look like. I won't go through these, but they should look like this. Every single sprint should have a very clear objective, very specifically, what are we going to work on? And then what is the definition of done? What do we have to complete before we move on to the next sprint? And I'm only showing you these just to give you an idea of how detailed they would be. So next slide. And the next slide. So again, the real critical piece here now in the sprints is really the definition of success, because I'm going to go back to the example. This MFI was very, very clear that we need to see the loan renewal rate, and we need to see our loan to credit officer ratios increase. I think we just jumped the slide. Can we go? There we go. And then we want portfolio and arrears to remain below 5%. And this is critical because even before the project starts, then a question to ask of the product roadmap and of the sprint schedules is, okay, at what point are you going to be able to show that your loan renewal rate is increasing? Or at what point are you going to be able to show that essentially your loan to credit officer ratio is improving? And that drives the precision and the priorities in the various sprints, because the sprints need to focus on the core product features that are going to do this, and they need to test them. And the test is done when the test proves concept. It shows, yes, look, we did this, and the loan renewal rate increased. So it's again, we're following a thread that starts way back at the hypothesis. These features will make this work. This is how we are going to build them and test them. And these are the metrics we're going to use to measure the customer response to these, to prove that, in fact, yes, the feature is working. Next slide. And this brings us to the tech piece. The overriding concern about tech really has to do with how simple they can make it. It is the single, as I said, it's the single greatest factor for failure. And you will find companies that are going to build in-house software, and you're going to find companies actually increasingly that are buying the software or the tech solution that they need as a software as a service. And your task will vary. It will vary significantly between the two. If you're dealing with a company that is going to do in-house, then you have to have someone on your team that understands software developments. It's a highly technical, specific area. And what you're looking for more than anything is whether or not the company, the product team, and the development team are built together in an agile process. That is the key thing. The biggest challenge around vendor source the tech solution, has to do with whether or not they get locked into a vendor that doesn't produce for them. And in both of these situations, I mean, again, you're probably going to need somebody on your team that's fully capable of understanding the basic tech solution. And in our case, it was algorithmic decisioning models. But the key thing you're looking for is minimum viable product. Can they have a version of this product? Can they have a version of this product that allows them to focus on the product features in the sequence that they want to? Next slide. And the question of whether or not their solution is appropriate for what they want to do is going to be found in the business requirements for their tech solution. So what you would expect to find is the company saying, hey, we want to build this decisioning model. And they have very, very specific business requirements. This is the data. This is the level of data integration that we want. And as I said, they said, we don't want the data integrated. We do not want system integration until like the 5th sprint. But there are very specific requirements for data. There's very specific reporting requirements that we want. We want the user interface, front end and back end, to look like this. We need this time to market. And we need the decisioning engine to create output in the following form. And this, somewhere in their plan, there need to be these business requirements, because the business requirements are created by the business team about this is what's going to drive value. And so the tech solution has to meet the business requirements. Once again, it's very, very common to see that there's no business requirements, that the business team never defines its product concept in terms of concrete technology solution requirements. And then what happens is the company either builds something that doesn't actually match the business requirements, or they buy something that is too rigid. So finding this document and finding a clear link between the features and the product roadmap and the business requirements for the tech solution is key. And I would say that you don't even necessarily have to be a technical expert to be able to see the links. Most people could probably read the business requirements and say, okay, I get it. I see how they've defined their approach to the technology, and it matches the product roadmap, and it matches the basic product features that they want to create. Next. Finally, the product team. I would say that the definition of the product team, the way it's resourced and the authorities it's given to make decisions, it goes to the bigger issue of change management. Does this company have the ability, essentially to innovate. And in the case of banks, the answer is almost always no. In banks, there is a tyranny in banks driven by the risk department, compliance department. It's my alarm. And the way that tyranny is broken is when the bank shifts to giving decision-making authority to the product team. The product team has to be able to move quickly through its sprint cycles and test out new pricing strategies, new marketing strategies, new ways of booking the loan in the core banking system, all manner of things, anything that it takes to change the loan. And if they are required to keep going back and getting a sign off from head of risk and head of compliance and head of business, the process bogs down. And so this question of whether, when the product charter is created, whether the team is created and that team has the skills that it needs, has the resources that it needs, and has the authority to make rapid decisions on a daily basis and in many banks, you're almost never going to find it. And so it's a very, very easy thing to spot, and it's very clear to see when they have it. All right, we've reached the end of the 1-hour version of this, and so I'm going to turn this over. Just quickly say, I have blasted through all of these components and realize it's difficult to digest at that speed. Just going to summarize by saying, understanding with more clarity and more time what goes into each one of these things, putting them on a checklist, walking in and listening to the way a company delivers their pitch and whether they have these elements is the heart of this. And I think we're going to hear now about an experience of someone doing just that. So I will turn this over.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for the detailed walkthrough of how the guidance can be applied in a due diligence exercise. That was really interesting, and I hope that this really speaks to the people in the room. So looking at the chat, I see that we have people from all over, from Zimbabwe, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Cameroon. So welcome, everyone. I also see a few questions, but before going to the questions, we're going to turn it over to Caroline. So I do encourage you to continue to post questions and comments in the chat, but we're going to now let's turn to Caroline to see how DFC recently used this guidance in their own due diligence process with 2 institutions in India. So Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Isabel. So yes, as Isabel said, my colleagues at DFC and I had the opportunity to receive this training from Mark and from Isabel, and then to work together to see how their research findings could be applied to a due diligence setting. And as she said, we were conducting due diligence on 2 technology-forward financial institutions in India in late May this year. And we used those visits as a test case to see how we might incorporate these findings in our due diligence process going forward. So I think as Mark emphasized a couple of times, the research is directly relevant to situations where there is a new investment in technology that's being planned or a new technology product that's being developed. And that wasn't necessarily the case with these 2 institutions that we were visiting, but we did reason that considering the high degree of existing digital infrastructure that was in place, that at some point during the life of the DFC loans that we were considering, there would certainly be going through a process of developing technology products. And we thought that we could use this training to get a sense of the degree to which they have in place the kind of processes and practices that would be necessary to ensure that that process is well done, that process of product development, essentially also helping us look for red flags. So at both institutions, we met with the person who was responsible for technology development. Titles would be things like Chief Product and Technology Officer or Chief Technology Officer. And we asked the questions that came out of this training that were aimed at trying to understand how the whole process works, starting with the strategy, the team, the organizational structure, and then going into more details around the process and the milestones. And because both of these institutions were really born with technology at the center of their product offering, we were very pleased to see that in general, there was good alignment with the principles of agile product development that Mark just outlined for us. But a couple of things that were interesting that stood out to us. Really, I think the most notable thing that stood out was the potential of variety in kind of findings depending on the stage of maturity of the organization. So one of the institutions we visited was earlier stage than the other with a smaller staff. So there wasn't the same degree of organizational structure around the product development process. But we were able to assess general alignment to those principles by asking about their strategy for creating value, learning more about their processes for how they prioritize product changes, how they align staff members around those priorities, what milestones they're looking to gauge success. So that was interesting that there could be different applications of this overall process, but the same questions can kind of get you to any gaps or red flags. Another thing that stood out was how in sort of the best case scenario, you would expect to hear the same kind of information repeated in different ways across the organization. So, for example, at one of the institutions we visited, the head of operations described an example of product development that had originated with customer feedback that came in through his department. And he, unprompted, described how that information flowed across to the product team. And then when we spoke with the product development team members, we were able to hear about what happened from there. And it presented a very clear picture of how an organization that has strong processes and organizational structure in place to support product development is able to move quickly, but carefully from feedback to implementation, involving different people across different departments, and everyone aligned and on the same page. So I think overall, our team found the guidance and training we received from Mark and Isabel to be very useful for snipping out whether there were likely to be any major red flags in the financial institution's capacity to develop products successfully, and also uncovered where it would be necessary to dig in further or to bring in a true expert. And I also find it quite helpful to go into these meetings with a vision of what good should look like from when it comes to technology and product development. And as more financial institutions are extending from more low-tech approaches to adopt technology in different ways, being able to incorporate this type of diligence questions into our practice is going to be very helpful, not only in identifying potential areas of risk, but maybe also in identifying entry points for our technical assistance program. So overall, we were very grateful for the opportunity to work with Mark and Isabel and CGAP. And we're looking forward to continuing to incorporate these research findings into our diligence practices for financial institutions on a regular basis.
Great. Thank you very much, Caroline, for sharing your insights on testing the guidance. And I have to say that DFC's feedback was really invaluable in helping to refine the guidance and to improve it. So thank you. Sarah, if you could put up the slide 33 again, please. So we'll get to Q&A in just 30 seconds. I just wanted to point out that all of the knowledge products from this project are available on CGAP's website at cgap.org/microfinance. So if you're interested in exploring any of the projects learning further, whether on automation of loan renewals or the development of business intelligence or the guidance for due diligence for investors that we discussed today, there are several publications there that I highly recommend that you check out. So now let's transition to the Q&A. We have a question from Franz Gomez that I will read. This question, I think, is addressed to Mark. It came when Mark was talking, but it's also relevant for Caroline. So Caroline, if you also want to answer, please feel free. And the question is in relation to the product team. So maybe you can put up that slide also if possible, but how many people were working on the innovation project, and what is the composition of the team? If you could provide a bit more information on that, on the project team composition, and also on the decision-making process. How are the decisions made, and what was the hierarchy in the group? That's an important part of those guidelines. So Mark, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it's going to vary significantly. You know, if a company is building its own software, there'll be a whole development team in addition to the product team. So a lot of it depends. Sorry. But I'll give you an example on this one. The product team on this loan renewal product was three or four people. It started out extremely lean. Because in their product roadmap, they said, look, first of all, we're just testing the features out about, they had at least ideas about risk-based pricing and incentive-based pricing. And so at the beginning of the project, it was really just about, we need to get these pricing schemes in front of the clients and see if they like them. And so there's no substitute for the exercise of just seeing, like, do they have enough people to implement their sprints? You know, because in the sprint schedule, they've told you what they're going to do, and you just ask, are there enough people on the team to do this? And if obviously you're going to need data teams backing this up, the IT department's got to be on. So there's not a single answer to the question. It's just that the importance of having the product roadmap and the sprints defined gives you a clue to the number of horses it's going to take to pull that cart, you know, and you're just going to have to go back and forth, and you might have to ask question, okay, who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? Do you have support? The question of their authority all came, in this case, very clearly from a sandbox. It was, they got agreement directly from the CEO and the risk committee of the board that said this product team is going to work in a sandbox, business as usual. We will move the people away from their day jobs. They will be dedicated 100% to this project, and the product lead will have 100% authority to make the following decisions. So that was just very, very clearly outlined in a policy approved by the CEO and the risk committee of the board.
Thank you, Mark. Caroline, did you want to add anything?
I think I'll only just kind of echo what you were saying, Mark, about how even with these two institutions, we saw variety in how this was organized, particularly because, as I said, one was much earlier stage than the other one. But at the more mature institution, it was interesting to see each product, each like loan product, like let's say it's the personal loan product, had a dedicated product manager, and that person needed to have the skills to not only interface with the business team, but also with the software team that was going to be making the actual technology changes. And her role was really to oversee that product at all levels, and again act as the bridge between those two worlds. And then I think this institution also had done a really good job of exemplifying what Mark was talking about, sort of identifying what the guardrails would be around the product development work. And so everything was certainly controlled. They're a regulated institution, so they had appropriate kind of risk management in place, but there was enough flexibility that was defined very clearly that they were also able to move quickly and iterate and improve their products for their customers.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Caroline. So I don't see any other questions in the chat, but I will ask one other question to you, Caroline. So a common question that arises when considering changes to a due diligence process or guidelines is often, how much time will this take? Do we have the necessary resources? And so with that in mind, Caroline, could you give us a sense of how much of the due diligence process was focused on this in the two visits that you did?
Yeah, and I'm not very good at kind of giving estimates like this, but I will do my best. To be honest, I think because both of these institutions had such kind of robust technology practices, we knew that it was going to be necessary to spend some extra time focusing on that and making sure it was strong and appropriate. But in reality, I don't think that the questions that came out of this research are so dramatically different from the types of questions that are already probably found within a lot of investors' due diligence. It's just tweaked slightly. It's just making sure that when you're looking at the organizational structure and figuring out who you're going to meet with and when you're there on site, making sure that you make the time to speak with the people who are sitting in those seats. And asking about this strategy and process, not focusing so narrowly on the IT side, but learning more about their strategy, their practice, organization structure. So I would say it was maybe just a slight expansion of what we were already be doing, but that provided a lot of insight that we would not have gotten otherwise. So if I had to put estimate on our change management, maybe 15% extra time figuring out how we would fit these questions in. But to be honest, I don't think it's an extreme burden. And we weren't going in with the expectation that we would, if there was a problem, we would be able to identify it and drill down on it ourselves, but more that if there was a problem or a gap, we would be able to recognize it and then identify the right person to assist us in figuring out how to fill the gap. So I think that's the approach that we took, knowing that we are not ourselves at the investment officer level, product development or technology experts.
Great. Great. Thank you very much for this. Very helpful. So we are unfortunately up with time. So I would like to thank our speakers, Mark and Caroline, for so eloquently translating the insights into practical examples and recommendation. I'd like to thank everyone also in the audience for your questions and for your interest on this topic. So the presentation, as Sarah has mentioned in the chat, will be posted on CGAP's website, and I encourage you to visit CGAP's microfinance page for more details. We also encourage you to test this guidance within your organization and to provide us with feedback. So thank you again to everyone and have a good day or evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.